Welcome to Twilight Fables. Tonight's story speaks of love that defied death and the breath that should have stayed buried. This is the 3 snake leaves, the breath that lingers. The man had always been ordinary, and perhaps that was what made his love dangerous. He was no knight, no noble son, just a soldier who had survived too many wars and returned home with scars no one wanted to see. His name had long since become unimportant to others, though the princess remembered it, and that was enough. He met her on a day when the sky was the colour of ashes. She had ridden into the square, disguised in a grey cloak, mingling with her people without her father's knowledge. She spoke to him like one speaks to a ghost, gently, with curiosity rather than fear. He had been cleaning blood from his sword after defending the town from bandits, and she had asked, "Does it ever come off completely?" He had smiled at her then, "Only if you forget who it belonged to." From that moment, she never forgot him. The king, stern and cold, did not approve of the match. The princess was expected to marry into a neighbouring house, not waste her hand on a soldier with nothing but his loyalty to offer. Yet, when she sickened a year later, wasting away from some strange fever that left her lips grey and her breath shallow, she whispered the soldier's name in every prayer. He came to her bedside when the healers had given up. She looked small, almost translucent, her veins like rivers beneath her skin. "I promised you the world," he said softly, holding her hand, "but I have nothing to give but myself." "Then give me that," she breathed, smiling faintly. "If I die, you must follow. You'll keep me company in the dark." He promised, and when she exhaled her last breath, he closed her eyes with trembling fingers and kept his vow. The king's men buried her in the royal crypt, a chamber carved from black marble beneath the palace. Her coffin was lined with silk and sealed with iron clasps. When the soldier demanded to be buried beside her, the court thought him mad, but the king, perhaps moved by pity or guilt, allowed it. Thus, they placed him alive in the tomb beside his bride. A torch burned dimly, its smoke curling like the memory of a soul, and the door closed behind him with a sound like the world ending. He sat in the dark for a long time, staring at her still face. Hours passed, days, perhaps. Hunger gnawed at him, and thirst made his thoughts fevered. He whispered stories to her body, recited the vows they never got to say aloud. Sometimes he thought she moved, the silk rustling faintly, her lips parting just so. He told himself it was grief playing tricks. Then, on the 3rd night, he heard it, a soft hiss from the shadows. He turned his head and saw a serpent slithering from a crack in the wall, its scales pale as bone. It wound itself toward the coffin, its tongue tasting the air near her hand. He rose, instinct taking over, and struck with the knife he'd hidden in his boot. The serpent writhed, its body curling and uncoiling until it fell still. He sat down again, shaking, but then came another sound, a second hiss, lower, sadder. A second serpent emerged from the same crack, larger than the first, its eyes glinting green in the torchlight. It paused over the dead one, flicking its tongue, and then slithered away into the shadows. When it returned, it carried in its mouth 3 green leaves, each glistening as though freshly plucked from some hidden garden. The serpent laid the leaves upon the dead one's body. A shimmer passed between them, faint as breath. Slowly, impossibly, the first serpent stirred. Its tongue flicked once, twice, and it rose, coiling around its companion in silent communion, before both vanished into the darkness. The soldier stared at the place where they'd been. Then, trembling, he picked up the 3 leaves. They felt warm, pulsing faintly like living skin. He turned to the coffin. Her face was pale, but her lips seemed softer than before. He placed 1 leaf upon her heart, 1 upon her brow, 1 between her lips. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her chest rose, shallow but sure, and a sigh escaped her mouth. Her eyes opened. At first, they were dull, cloudy. Then they cleared, and she looked at him with a kind of startled wonder. "You kept your promise," she whispered. He fell to his knees, sobbing into her hands. They were cold, but they gripped his face as though she were the one holding him together. When the tomb was opened days later, the guards expecting to retrieve a corpse and finding 2 living souls instead, the kingdom declared it a miracle. Bells rang in the city, prayers were sung, and the king wept openly for the first time in his reign. He embraced his daughter and even knelt before the soldier, declaring him chosen by the gods. They were wed before a week had passed. The palace filled with light again, but light does strange things to shadows. The soldier, now prince by marriage, slept lightly as he had always done, yet he began to notice her absence at night. Her side of the bed would be cold when he woke, her perfume lingering faintly in the hall. At first, he thought she wandered to the chapel to pray. She had, after all, crossed the boundary of life and death. But one night, following the faint trail of her scent, he found her in the garden beneath the moon. She was not alone. A guard stood before her, dazed, his posture slack. She leaned close, pressing her lips to his. The soldier froze, jealousy and confusion wrestling in his chest. Then he saw the guard's body tremble. His hands clawed weakly at the air as a thin mist, silver and luminous, rose from his mouth and flowed into hers. The guard collapsed. She turned slowly, and her eyes gleamed, not with guilt, but hunger. "My love," she said softly, wiping her lips. You shouldn't be awake. What have you done?" His voice was hoarse, the words barely forming. "Do you remember the snakes?" she asked, stepping closer. "They taught me something. The dead cannot stay among the living without a price. Breath must be borrowed. You're feeding on them. Only a little," she said gently. "Just enough to keep the cold away. Would you rather I rot?" He took a step back, horror twisting his face. "There must be another way." "There isn't." She reached out, fingers brushing his cheek. Her touch was still cold. "You brought me back. You wanted me warm, wanted me breathing. Do you regret it now, that I must take what you gave?" He said nothing. She smiled faintly and kissed his forehead, leaving a chill that did not fade until morning. He tried to live as though he had not seen. He convinced himself it was madness, exhaustion, some trick of the moonlight, but the signs grew. Men in the palace began falling ill, pale, gasping, their eyes sunken. The healers called it a wasting sickness. Only he knew the truth. He confronted her again weeks later, in their chamber. "I've seen the bodies," he said. "You're killing them." Her expression was unreadable. "You speak as though they're people you know. They serve you. They trusted you." She turned away, adjusting a strand of hair in the mirror. "You think I enjoy this? Do you know what it's like to feel your lungs stiffen at dawn, to cough earth instead of breath? I remember my grave, every moment, the dark pressing in. I won't go back." He reached for her. "Then let me find a way to save you. The snakes, perhaps they can." She laughed, low and sharp. "The snakes don't save my love. They only trade." That night, she didn't return to bed until the first pale light of dawn. He pretended to be asleep as she slipped beneath the sheets, her skin cool against his. For the first time, he noticed she no longer exhaled in her sleep. Her chest rose and fell, but no breath misted in the air. He lay beside her, listening to the silence where her breath should be, and thought of the crypt, of the second serpent watching him as he took the leaves. Perhaps this was his punishment, to have the thing he loved, but never truly alive. Days bled into nights. Rumours spread through the kingdom, whispers of a curse, of a queen who never aged, whose touch left frost. The king, now frail and superstitious, began to fear his own daughter. One evening, as the moon hung swollen over the towers, the soldier heard her voice drifting from the chapel. He followed quietly. She knelt before the altar, her gown pooling like spilled milk around her. "Why do you punish me?" she whispered to the empty air. "I didn't ask to return." The soldier hesitated in the doorway. "Do you want to die again?" he asked softly. She turned, eyes wet but shining. "I want to live without stealing from others. But that's not how this world works, is it? Even you live on borrowed breath. The only difference is that you don't admit it." He stepped closer, kneeling beside her. "Then take mine. he said, the words trembling out before he could stop them. If that's what keeps you here. She stared at him stunned. Don't say things you can't take back. I already did, the day I buried myself with you. She reached out and touched his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. Not yet, she murmured. Not until I can bear losing you again. But love is a fragile dam against hunger. The sickness worsened. Whole wings of the palace fell silent at night. Servants avoided her corridors, crossing themselves when her name was spoken. And still, she smiled sweetly at feasts, her skin flawless, her laughter echoing like crystal breaking. He watched her from across long tables, surrounded by flickering candles. Her reflection shimmered strangely in the goblets, her eyes glowing faintly green beneath the light. When she reached for his hand, it was as if the warmth fled his fingers. I can stop, she said one night, voice soft, if you ask me to. He looked at her, truly looked, and saw the faint lines beneath her eyes, the tremor in her hands, the slow stiffening of her joints. She was dying again. No, he whispered. I can't lose you. Then you understand, she said, almost tenderly. I'll only take what I need. He kissed her then, tasting salt and something colder beneath. It felt like kissing winter itself. Still, guilt has a way of growing roots. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the palace lamps burned low, he found himself descending to the crypt where he had once died beside her. The air was thick with dust and the scent of stone. He knelt where her coffin had once stood and whispered into the dark, What have I done? There was no answer, only the faintest sound of scales sliding across stone. He froze. From the same crack in the wall, a serpent emerged. Its eyes glowed faintly, and in its mouth it carried a single green leaf. The soldier stared as it dropped the leaf before him and vanished again into the shadows. He reached down, trembling, and picked it up. The leaf was warm, alive. He didn't know whether it was a gift or a warning. When he returned to their chambers, she was standing by the window, her gown whispering against the floor. Moonlight traced her outline, so beautiful, so still. You went below, she said without turning. How did you? I can smell the dust, she murmured, and them. He held up the leaf. Tell me what this means. She turned at last. Her eyes reflected the moon like twin shards of glass. It means they're watching, she said. They want balance. They always do. Then what do they want from me? From you? She smiled faintly. Nothing. They already took what mattered. He looked at the leaf again, its veins pulsing softly. If I destroyed it, then I would fade, she said simply, and you'd have your peace. He stared at her for a long time, torn between love and terror. Then he placed the leaf on the bedside table and turned away. Neither of them slept that night. By morning, frost crept along the window panes, tracing shapes like scales. The servants whispered that winter had come early, but the soldier knew better. He dreamed of her breath, soft, cold, endless, and wondered if, when she smiled at him, she saw a husband or another meal. The castle that once seemed like a cradle for joy had become a tomb painted in gold. The courtyards that once rang with laughter now echoed only the faint scuff of servants' shoes and the rustle of ivy creeping up its cold stone. Within its heart, in chambers perfumed with myrrh and rose, the princess walked again among the living, yet she was no longer of them. Her eyes were the same, green as spring leaves, but they no longer glimmered with warmth. They shimmered instead with something that caught the light too sharply, like glass cutting through silk. At first, no one dared whisper their fears. The people had seen her rise from death. After all, to question her was to question a miracle, but whispers have their own life, crawling through halls and kitchens until they fester in every shadow. They said she no longer ate food, though trays were sent to her chambers. They said her reflection lingered in mirrors long after she left. They said that on certain nights, when the moon was thin and white as a bone, she left her chambers barefoot and vanished into the gardens. The husband, the man who had dared the grave for love, refused to listen. His heart was chained to hope. "She's healing," he would say. "She needs time." The grave was cold, the air there thin, and yet, sometimes, when she slept, he would wake to find her hand upon his chest, her lips parted as if tasting his breath. It began on a night when the sky hung too still. The prince's new duties had multiplied. The king had grown old and spent his days in prayer, whispering thanks to the gods for the miracle of his daughter's return. The prince attended councils, oversaw harvests, and made certain the royal guards stayed vigilant. He came to bed late, often after midnight. On one such night, he found the bed empty. The linens were cool, though the candle still burned low. Her slippers were gone from the hearth. He called softly for her, thinking she'd gone to walk off a sleepless spell. But the silence that followed felt wrong. It was too thick, too full, like the castle itself was holding its breath. He went to the balcony and looked down. There she was, pale in her nightdress, her hair loose like black silk, walking barefoot across the moonlit courtyard. She moved toward the edge of the gardens, where the yew trees grew dense and old, where even guards did not linger. He called her name, softly at first, then louder. She didn't turn. She slipped between the hedges, swallowed by the dark. By morning, she was in bed again, her lips slightly parted in sleep, her skin faintly warm. When he asked where she'd gone, she smiled in a way that almost made him believe he'd dreamed it. "I walk sometimes when I cannot rest," she murmured. "The moon reminds me that I'm still among the living, but her voice, it had a hollow undertone, like a whisper from behind a wall. 3 days later, a servant was found dead by the orchard wall. No mark upon him, no wound, no sign of poison, only an expression of peace stretched too far, as if joy had been pulled from his face until it broke. The healer said his heart had simply stopped, though he looked as though he'd just exhaled a long sigh. The princess wept beautifully when she heard. She clutched her husband's hand and said, "How fragile the living are." Yet that night, the prince dreamed of the orchard. He saw her standing above the fallen servant, her hair spilling forward like a curtain, her hands trembling as she leaned down. The dream felt too vivid, too close. He could smell the wet earth, the trace of myrrh and rot. He awoke in a cold sweat and reached for her. Her side of the bed was empty. He began to watch, quietly, carefully. He told no one, not even the steward who'd served him since boyhood. When she retired to her chambers, he pretended to sleep. He heard her breathe beside him, slow and steady. Then, past midnight, her breathing stopped. He waited. The sound came, the faint creak of floorboards, the whisper of fabric brushing against stone. He opened his eyes. She stood at the foot of the bed, facing the window. The moonlight turned her hair white. Her body swayed slightly, as if listening to something distant. Then, without a sound, she moved toward the door. He followed barefoot, staying in the shadow of the pillars. Down the corridors she went, gliding more than walking, through the glass gallery where portraits of dead queens stared from cracked frames, down the marble stairs, across the frost-lit courtyard. She moved toward the outer gate, where the guards slept in their posts, their torches guttering. She passed them without stirring them, as though they could not see her. Beyond the gate was a small village that nestled at the edge of the royal woods. The prince followed until the scent of earth gave way to smoke and hay. She entered a house, a modest one, the door opening without her touch. Inside, he saw her kneel beside a sleeping man, a farmer, perhaps. From the look of his hands, she leaned close, and from her lips poured a thin stream of silver mist, winding from his mouth to hers, like thread drawn from a loom. The man's body twitched, then stilled. His face sagged, the warmth gone. The prince nearly cried out, but something in him froze. Awe and horror knotted tight in his chest. He wanted to rush in, to tear her away, but some quiet part of him whispered, "This is what I brought back." When she was done, she stood and turned toward the door. For one terrible moment, he thought her eyes met his, but she only walked past him, humming softly, the song she used to sing before death. He returned before she did, heart racing, mind splintered. He climbed into bed and lay still until dawn. When she entered the chamber, her lips glowed faintly, as though painted with some inner light. She pressed her cool hand to his cheek and whispered, "You dreamed again, didn't you? You always look frightened in the morning." He couldn't answer. His tongue felt heavy with unspoken words. She kissed him, gentle, lingering, and when she pulled away, he could swear he saw a tendril of vapour escape his own mouth and vanish into hers. That morning, word came from the village, another death, a man found pale and smiling, his hands clasped upon his chest. The healer muttered again about weak hearts and bad air. The prince dismissed his attendants and locked himself in the study. He took out the box of snake leaves, 3 green fragments, dry and curling at the edges. They pulsed faintly when touched, alive in a way that felt wrong. He remembered how the first had trembled when it lay upon her cold face, how her lips had parted, gasping for breath. He remembered the scent that followed, not of the grave, but of something older, the smell of a crypt that had never been opened, of earth too deep to know sunlight. Had he brought her back, or had he called something else, something that only wore her face? He pressed the leaves shut again and hid the box beneath the hearthstone, but the question stayed. Weeks passed. The princess seemed radiant, more so than ever. Her cheeks were flushed, her laughter bright. The court adored her. They said she was more alive than any woman in the realm, but her husband grew thin, haunted. He avoided her gaze, though she sought it with almost desperate sweetness. She began to ask strange questions. "Do you ever think of death?" she whispered one night. "Not anymore," he said. "You should," she murmured. "It's not so different from dreaming." That night he followed her again, but this time she didn't go to the village. She went to the chapel. Inside, candles flickered, though no one had lit them. She knelt before the altar, her gown pooling like spilled milk around her. He watched from the doorway as she lifted her arms, whispering words that made his skin crawl. Then, from the air itself, a faint shimmer appeared, like dust caught in moonlight. It gathered above her palms, condensing, until faces began to form, faces of the men she had fed upon, their expressions peaceful, their eyes empty. She inhaled deeply, and the shimmer poured into her. The candles flared blue. The prince stepped back, knocking over a pew. She turned at once, her face calm, her mouth curved in that terrible smile. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "You'll wake them. What are you? he whispered. Her smile trembled, then broke. You made me what I am. He fled. He didn't remember how he reached their chambers, or what words spilled from his lips. All he knew was that when dawn came, she stood beside the bed, eyes red with tears. I didn't want you to see, she said. It hurts more when I must take from them, but I need it. The air, the warmth. I can feel myself fading without it. He shook his head, unable to breathe. You're killing them. I'm only borrowing what I've lost, she whispered. You took it from me when you called me back. Her voice broke, and for the first time, he saw fear in her. Real, human fear. Don't send me back there, she begged. It's so cold, and I remember everything. I can still feel the earth pressing down. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to scream. But instead, he touched her face. She leaned into his palm, like a child seeking warmth. I'll find a way, he said quietly. There must be a way for you to live without this. She smiled, but there was no joy in it. You say that because you love me, but love cannot feed me, only breath. He began to weaken soon after. His skin grew pale, his sleep restless. He would wake, gasping, his lungs aching as if the air had thinned. One morning, he caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. Only her reflection, though she stood beside him. It smiled when she did not. He began to suspect she was already feeding on him, gently, subtly, so he would not notice. And yet, part of him welcomed it. He thought, if she must take from me to live, then let it be so. Let my breath sustain her. But he could not hide his sickness forever. The court physicians urged rest. The king began to whisper of curses, of foul sorcery. The princess wept in public, pressing her face to her husband's hands. In private, her eyes were dry. That night, she kissed him longer than usual. When she pulled away, he felt a deep coldness spread through his chest. His breath fogged the air, though the room was warm, and still he smiled for her. The next morning, he could barely rise. His vision blurred, his heartbeat shallow. She sat beside him, brushing his hair from his face. You look so tired, she whispered. Rest now. I dreamed of you, he murmured. Before the grave, I thought the gods gave you back to me, but maybe it was something else. She kissed his forehead. Does it matter if I'm here? He tried to answer, but the words dissolved into a sigh. She leaned close, breathing him in. He felt his strength leaving, but he didn't resist. The last thing he saw was her eyes, not cruel, not monstrous, but full of sorrow. Sleep, she whispered. Just for a while. When the servants entered later, they found him pale, but alive, his breath shallow. The princess sat beside him, humming softly, her fingers tracing his lips. They said she looked radiant that morning, almost divine. The halls of the castle had grown quieter. The echo of her laughter, once a promise of warmth, had become a whisper that lingered too long, like smoke in the air after a candle is snuffed. The prince no longer walked the corridors with the same surety. His steps had slowed, his voice softened, and the air around him seemed thinner, as if the castle itself had drawn from him his last reserve of strength. He could not ignore what he had seen, what he had suspected, but neither could he bear the truth of it entirely. The princess moved through the court with an ease that unsettled him. To all who watched, she was radiant, as though her death had granted her beauty in excess. But he alone knew her hunger. He could see it in the quiet moments, the way her lips parted in a sigh when she thought herself alone, the way her breath seemed to lengthen in the dark, the faint silver shimmer that clung to her skin when the candlelight fell at just the wrong angle. He knew she was feeding again, and he knew too that the cost was written upon him. The nights had become his own trial. He stayed awake now, lying beside her in feigned sleep, listening for the sound of her departure. When she left, he would follow, though his limbs were heavy with weakness. His breath came in ragged pulls, and he feared he would not last another watch before she returned. And each night, without fail, she went to the village, and each night he saw her claim another. The way she moved among them was no longer tender. It was a hunt. Her body swayed like a shadow, drawn by hunger, her hands trembling as she took into herself what she needed to live. He began to understand then. The snake leaves had not returned her as she was. They had bound her to another hunger, to something beyond flesh, to breathe itself. One night, he followed her further than ever before. The air in the castle was cold as he trailed her barefoot over frost-glazed stones. She did not move toward the village as usual. Instead, she walked deeper into the forest, her figure dissolving among the trees until only her breath lingered, a faint silver mist that hung between the trunks. He stepped closer, stumbling over roots, until he found her in a glade where the moonlight pooled like liquid silver. There was a circle of stone there, older than the castle, worn by centuries of wind. She stood within it, her arms lifted toward the sky. Her lips moved, whispering words he could not understand, and the air began to tremble. The breath before her thickened, forming shapes, faces of men and women long gone, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent sighs. They drifted toward her like moths drawn to flame, disappearing into her as she drank. She did not see him approach. He stepped into the circle, his foot breaking the silence with a soft crunch. She turned then slowly, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "Why do you follow me?" she asked, her voice both soft and terrible. "I cannot stand it," he said. "I cannot watch you like this." Her lips curled in something between a smile and a sigh. "You knew what this would be when you brought me back. Did you think it would not have a price?" He reached for her, but she stepped back, her gaze drifting past him. "You cannot stop it. The breath has claimed me, and soon—" She paused, her voice breaking. "It will claim you too." That night, he could not sleep. He lay beside her, trembling beneath the weight of what she had said. His breath was short, shallow. He could feel it leaving him, and yet he could not bring himself to speak the words that pressed on his lips. To tell her he would rather die than let her continue this. Morning came, and with it a strange stillness. The castle seemed quieter than before. Even the servants moved with hushed steps. He called to her, but she did not answer. When he entered her chamber, she was gone. He searched the castle, the gardens, the halls. Only the chapel lay open, its candles guttering in the morning air. There she knelt before the altar, her body swaying in prayer. Her hands were clasped tight around something unseen, and her lips moved in silence. When she turned to him, her face was pale as bone, her eyes deep and hollow. "You cannot stop it," she said again, "and you will not." Before he could speak, she stepped forward, placing her hand upon his chest. Her fingers were cold as marble. He felt a weight pressing into him, a breath leaving him that was not his own. His knees buckled, and he fell to the stone floor, gasping. She knelt beside him, her forehead touching his, and whispered, "You are mine now." The breath takes what it will. His vision narrowed to her eyes, green as spring leaves, and he saw within them something terrible. Not hunger, not death, but longing, a longing that would never end. The last thing he heard before the world slipped away was her voice, soft as a prayer. "Sleep now, my love, sleep forever." When he awoke, he was no longer in the castle. The air was thin and cold, the world dim and hollow. Around him lay the faces of those she had taken, silent and still, their mouths parted as though breathing in something unseen. And there, at the centre of them all, stood the princess, her form shimmering, her eyes glowing with a pale light. She stepped toward him, and he knew without words that there was no return. The breath had claimed him. She took him into her arms, and he felt himself drawn into her, his breath slipping away into the silver mist that clung to her skin. His last thought was of the snake leaves hidden beneath the hearthstone, and the terrible truth that some deaths are final, not because of their ending, but because of what they leave behind. The castle was silent, the courtyard stood empty, and in the forest beyond, under the hollow moon, the breath lingered still.